Okay, welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to be talking about ClassJuggler policies and the agreements that go along with them. Policies and agreements allow you to set up your liability and legal waivers for your parents to agree to online, or for an administrator to add to a parent's account if you're still using paper versions of those forms along with the electronic versions that you create. Policies can be things like liability policies, injury and waiver policies, payment policies, photo waivers, and other things that are important to the day-to-day operations of your classes at your business. Let's jump right into this and talk about where we establish these policies in the first place. Just like most of everything in ClassJuggler, when we're setting up tables or ranges of selections, we're going to create that under our Preferences main menu. So I'm going to go ahead and click on my Preferences main menu. And then I'm going to select under our Optional Preferences, Policies and Agreements. And here's my Policy and Agreement screen. And you'll see here that I've got a number of policies, 5 of them that are in our system. Things from liability waivers, supervision, payment policies, photo waivers, etc. You'll notice to the right of each one of these is an action and info column. And this tells us whether or not that anyone or any one of our customers has already acknowledged one of our policies. If they have, it permanently locks that policy in place so no changes can be made to it. And the reason that it is locked so no changes can be made is if we were to go in and change even one word of a policy that someone's agreed to, we've essentially invalidated that agreement with that particular customer. So you can always replace a policy with a new policy, but you can never change an existing policy once at least one customer has agreed to it. So policies are made up of several parts. The first is the title of the policy. For example, let's look at our photo waiver. Right underneath that is a text box where you can paste in the entire verbiage of that particular policy, whether that's something you created or you got from your legal counsel or from a legal service. Right underneath that is the type of policy, whether that's an optional or mandatory policy. Mandatory policies are policies that you have to have each and every one of your customers agree to allow them to participate in your services. Optional policies, for example, a photo waiver, might be if you want that customer to tell you whether or not they would allow photos or videos of their child to be shared on social media, on your website, reproduced in print, so forth. And there's also a usage of policy. Does this policy apply to an entire family or to a specific student? Some businesses require that for each child in a family, an individual policy is agreed to for each and every child. So here's our policy list in our database. So let's talk about how policies get assigned to a family or to a student. There's 2 different ways this can be done. The most efficient and the best way is through the customer self-service portal. To do that, we basically would take the policies that we want to have parents agree to during a new registration, or if it's not on their account, ask those questions, those policies to those parents again. And we do that by linking the policies into the self-service manager under our tools menu, where we configure the entire functionality of the customer self-service portal. The second way policies can be added to accounts is manually by a ClassJuggler administrator. So let's look at that first. So I'm going to just go to my customer listing, and I'm going to just pull up a random customer. Let's choose April Bailey, for example. I'm going to select this customer record, and then I'm going to go to Maintenance Page 2 on the menu on our left. And this is going to take me to some of those additional fields and values, places where I can put notes, emergency contact information, referrals and marketing tracking, and other things. And down at the bottom of the screen here, you'll notice a section called Customer Policies and Agreements that apply to the entire family. And right now, this particular account has no policies or agreements assigned to them. So if I'm an administrator and let's say, for example, I'm not using the self-service portal, but I've just received a paper registration form from this parent that has those policies on it written out, they've signed that and handed in to us. Once we put them into our database, I can also then assign those policies just by clicking the edit button down at the bottom of that record. And now I'm going to click on add new to add a policy to this customer's account, and it's going to bring up a pop-up and ask me to select the policy and agreement to assign to this customer. So here are all the policies that are in our database for parents, and I'm going to go ahead and select, for example, the liability waiver. If I were to choose a optional policy, for example, the photo waiver, you'll notice ClassJuggler displays an extra row where I have to provide the response that the parent provided. Do they agree or do they not agree to that optional agreement? If it's a mandatory policy, for example, our payment policy, where they have to agree to it, I'm just recording that I did receive a signed version of that registration form that had that policy on it. So when I click Save here, you'll see now it has added that policy to this customer's account. And again, at the bottom, it's telling me it's a mandatory policy and the date it was added and by whom it was added. Again, I can also say Add New again. I'm going to choose that photo waiver, which I know is an optional policy, and I'm going to say that this customer does agree to allow their children to be photographed. Click on Save on that, and now we also have the photo waiver, and you'll notice this one has a type of optional, and it shows us the answer that that parent provided, either a yes or a no if they deny that particular agreement. So I'm going to go ahead and close this, and now you'll see on that maintenance page 2 screen those same two policies that we just added to that customer's account. And I can see again very quickly at a glance the optional ones versus the mandatory, and what the response was for any optional policy that the parent agreed to. Now let's talk about the ultimate way of kind of handling your policies, and that's through the online self-service center. Well, and that's all managed under our Tools main menu. So let's go there first. Tools, and I'm going to select the Self-Service Manager, which is the screen where we configure everything about the customer self-service portal. And you'll notice down at the bottom in that group of tabs, one of the tabs is called Customer and Student Policies. Now if I select that, this is where I can then say of all the policies that we have set up under our preferences, account-wide in ClassJuggler, which one of those policies or which policies do I want to link into the portal so that as new parents register or existing parents return, it verifies and ensures each one of those customer accounts has agreed to and reviewed each and every one of the policies that I decided to link. So you remember under preferences we did have 5 policies, but under the under the Customer and Student Policies tab on the Self-Service Manager, I've only linked in 4 of these. So 3 of them are customer based. I've got a mandatory customer policy for liability, an optional policy for photo waiver for the customer, a mandatory policy for payments, and then a mandatory student policy called supervision of the children. So now all of these are linked. That means that when someone registers as a new family on our self-service center, it's going to ask the policy questions that I have linked into the customer self-service manager. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to switch over to another web browser where I've got the customer portal. So this is the screen a parent would see when they link off of your website to either register or sign back into an account as a returning customer. So for the first example of this, I'm going to say that I am a new customer. And I'm going to click on I am a new customer. So I'm registering as a brand new client of this business. So here's my form where I would put in all my information, create my own account, email address, etc. And now notice at the bottom we have a section for policies. Here it says new customer acknowledgement of our mandatory policies. So here are our 2 mandatory policies, our company liability waiver. And for me to complete this registration, I have to click on this policy and say I have read and agreed to this policy. Our second one is the payment policy. Again, I have to click I have read and agree to the above policy. And then at the end, we see there is a new customer acknowledgement of optional policies. And here's our photo waiver. I agree to allow for any photographs or videos of my child, blah, blah, blah. Do I agree or do I not agree? Well, in this case, I'm going to just say, you know what, I don't agree. Now, when I save this, this is going to save those values with my account so that they're digitally signed and stored on that customer record once I've completed my registration. This virtually eliminates all paperwork, and because these are digitally signed, they are binding, and you can always review and pull these policies up for a customer if they ever dispute a payment policy, a liability, or a photo discussion that you might have with them. All you have to do is pull their record up, look at how they responded to the optional policies, and see all the mandatory policies they agreed to, and that gives you basically an ironclad set of proof that that customer said they read and agreed to your policies. Now let's go back as a returning customer. Let's say I decide to log back in as a customer, and maybe I haven't signed into my account for a while. So here I am, a returning customer. I'm just putting in my email address and password, and I'm going to sign in. Now, because I've not been a customer for a while of this particular business, policies may have changed or been added that I may not have acknowledged. So here, before it even allows me back into my account, it's presenting me with policies that I have not agreed to. So here's the liability waiver, which apparently I had not agreed to yet. It's going to require me to check that. Also the payment policy, as well as the new photo waiver optional policy. Again, I'm going to say I do not agree, and I'm going to hit save and continue. Now that I've acknowledged those policies, it does let me back into my full account. Here's my welcome screen. And as a parent, while I can do all sorts of different things, manage my children, look at my account history, choose new classes, if I go to my information tab, I can always click on the policies and agreement link at the top and see all the policies, whether they're mandatory or optional, that I've agreed to in our family. And this is a great way for parents to have access to those same policies that they've agreed to, again, as proof and as reinforcement for your company's policies. Let's go back and look at this customer's account and see what happened during that follow through where I signed back in and had to agree to these policies. So I'm going to go back to the administrative side of ClassJuggler. I'm going to pull up my customer listing. I'm going to go to this particular customer. This is April. And I'm going to go to her maintenance page 2. And sure enough, there are those 3 policies that I just agreed to when I signed into the account. So here's my mandatory, my company liability waiver, payment policy, and that optional photo waiver, which I said no to, if you remember. So here's everything digitally signed. I have proof of it on the customer's record, and that makes it very easy for me to track everything. Now you may sometimes have questions to say, well, who in my database has not agreed to a particular policy? Or who has a particular policy or who doesn't have a particular policy? Well, I can do that by going to my policy report. So I go to my reports main menu and I go to my customer reports, and you'll see here's policies and agreements. Let's take a quick look at that. So we've got a number of options on how we run this. We can say I'd like to show all customers that have a selected policy, and then I just use this drop down here to select which policy I see or which policy I'm filtering by to find which customers have already acknowledged that policy. Or I could say show me customers that do not have a selected policy. And thirdly, I could say just show me everybody's policies listed neatly underneath their names. Let's take a quick run of this. Show customers with a selected policy. Let's see who's got our new optional photo waiver policy. I'm going to just click Generate Report, and here's our nice PDF results showing us that we've got 2 customers that have the optional photo waiver policy. And you'll notice right in front of the name of the customer is their response, whether it was a yes or a no, given the fact that this was an optional policy. Let's try one that's a mandatory policy. Who has the payment policy and amounts? We have 2 customers that have that policy. And thirdly, let's look at our last one, the company liability waiver. And this one, we have quite a few customers that have this. Well, now we want to know, well, who doesn't have our photo waiver policy? Let's choose photo waiver. And now let's choose customers that do not have the selected policy. When I run this report again, I'm going to get a much larger list. In this case, I've got 51 pages of customers of all statuses, categories, because I did not filter this, that have not agreed to that optional photo waiver or responded to it with a yes or a no. So there's no response back from all of these customers. And this is a good way to find out how close you are to having everybody agreed to all of your important policies at your business. You may have people that are still coming in and taking classes that have not logged into their account to agree to those additional policies. And if it's important for your business, you'll want to find out who does not have a particular policy and make sure that they agree to them. And that could be as simple as having them log back into their account to agree, or providing them with a printed policy form that they have to sign when they bring their child in for classes. Now, the one thing we haven't talked about are student policies. There are policies that can apply individually to students. Now, if I go back to the parent portal, remember we had logged in as a returning customer and agreed to some additional policies that had changed. Well, if I go to my students, let's say I go in to add a new child to my database. We have Bobby Taylor, or Bobby Abercrombie, that just has been added and is going to start taking classes. You'll notice as I'm creating this student record, down at the bottom we have a section called New Student Acknowledgement of our mandatory policies. So again, before I'm allowed to create this child's record, I would have to agree to the above policy, as well as also agree to a registration fee, which is another optional feature. But the important thing is that new student acknowledgement of mandatory policies. And once I've agreed to both of these, I would be able to then save that particular student. Now, what about my existing child? So I already had Taylor in the database. Well, she may have been added prior to us actually creating that new policy. Well, there's a couple ways we can catch this. One is by, again, running a policy report and finding out which students do not have a student policy. So let's go ahead and look at Taylor's record. Well, if Taylor was added quite a while back, she may not have been created at the time we had that policy in our database. Well, that means she has not agreed to it. And we could find that out easily by running a report in ClassJuggler on the student policies report to find out which students did not have a particular policy. The other place that this is going to get captured is if I were to go and select a class, shop for a class online as a parent for that particular child. So let's do that. I'm going to click on Shop for Classes. I'm going to choose the store. And here's a few classes I can choose from. Again, you'd probably have more classes in your real business. This is just my demo. And I'm going to choose a competition team class for Taylor. So here's Taylor. Now you notice as soon as I select Taylor, I get a couple things here. One is my acknowledgement of mandatory policies. So it catches it even when I'm about to check out with a order that I haven't agreed to all the new policies for students. So this is another great place that it's captured. The other way I could do this is, again, if I ran a report, I'm going to go back to the administrator side of ClassJuggler. Let's say I run a report, and I'm going to go to my student reports and do policies and agreements. And let's run it for that mandatory policy and see who does not have this. I could run that report. And here's my student report, and sure enough, I can see Taylor Abercrombie right here. I've highlighted her. She does not have that policy, and I want her to have that policy. So as an administrator, flip back to ClassJuggler, pull Taylor Abercrombie up as a student. So here we are in maintenance page 1. And now I'm going to go over to maintenance page 2, where again we have all those additional fields and values and so forth. And here's the student policies and agreements. Maybe I've got, again, that parent has to sign that particular policy form for that individual child. And once I've got that form, I can easily go in again and add that policy to her account as a student. So here's the supervision of the children. Save that, and now it's on Taylor's account as well. So the policies and agreements is a powerful feature, especially when it's linked in with your customer portal, to assure compliance of all your important business policies, whether they be optional policies that you need a response on, things like photo waivers, or your mandatory policies, such as your payment policy or your late fees policy, or anything that's required by your business that each of those families agree to before they are allowed to participate in classes with you. So I hope you learned something about our policies. Don't forget to check out the online help guide if you need additional help on using any one of the screens or reports that we showed you. And happy juggling.